Even the best of political ideologies inevitably contain internal contradictions, or at the very least, contain good ideas which are potentially dangerous if taken to extremes. Even the worst of political ideologies usually contain a few gold nuggets that are worth extracting, or at the very least offer criticisms of another political ideology that are worth considering. A lot of people have come to think of the left versus right paradigm as too simplistic, and I agree. I think it's more useful to think in terms of authoritarianism versus libertarianism, and collectivism versus individualism. I think you can crudely put this in terms of libertarianism versus socialism. So usually when I talk about libertarianism, I'm using the term as basically synonymous with individualism. And when I talk about socialism, I'm using the term as basically synonymous with collectivism. And collectivism definitely has a tendency toward authoritarianism, in my opinion. I do advocate certain forms of libertarian socialism, though, and I'll get more into that as I go. Socialism has become almost synonymous with big government. Many people think of socialism as the state controlling everything. In many people's minds, socialism is associated with tyranny and totalitarianism, for obvious historical reasons. And of course, most people who consider themselves socialist will say that these socialist or communist dictatorships don't represent true socialism, or true communism. And people will always argue about what true Christianity, true Islam, true feminism, or true anything else is. But I think there's a fair point to be made here. As I see it, the central idea behind socialism or communism is the principle of worker ownership. In a totalitarian state, the state, rather than the workers, owns the means of production. So it isn't really socialism. Socialism is about ownership. If we take a classic example of a factory, the capitalist is the guy who owns the factory, the tools, the machines, the raw materials, etc. He also owns whatever goods are produced through the labor of the factory workers. The workers themselves own nothing. They sell their labor. They don't own what they produce, though. The products of their labor belong to the capitalist. So you have a class of owners and a class of producers. And socialists see the owner class as exploiting the producers or the working class, because the wages the owners pay the workers is always less than the value of the products of their labor. In other words, workers are always paid less than the value their labor produces for the capitalist. And this difference between the wages the capitalist pays the worker and the value he gets from the worker is what we call profit, according to this view. An employer won't hire you unless he can make more money off of you, off of your work, than he pays you for your work. So you're always being paid less than the value you're creating for him. And so many see this as a fundamentally exploitative relationship, and I basically agree. And I think this is an argument that libertarians should be concerned with. At the core of libertarianism is the principle of self-ownership. You own yourself. Don't you own what you create through your own mental and physical labor? This is one of the basic arguments for private property. So I think that the core value of socialism is compatible with the core value of libertarianism. Yet many libertarians defend the capitalist exploitation of workers. And ironically, they use the principle of self-ownership to do this. They say, if I own myself, and I own my labor, don't I have the right to sell my labor? And doesn't the capitalist have the right to buy it in a free market? But if we can use that argument to defend wage labor, why can't we use that argument to defend slavery as well? After all, if you own yourself, can't you sell yourself to another person as property? Is it moral to own another person? If someone is unable to pay their debt, can their creditor force them into slave labor in order to pay off the debt? If so, Can't the creditor sell them as a slave to a third party also? This isn't a version of libertarianism that I'm willing to support, and I argue that wage labor is essentially no different from slavery. Imagine for a moment that you're a slave. Your master owns you and forces you to work for him, but he feeds, shelters, and clothes you because you're his property. Just like you have to do basic maintenance on your car or house, just like a farmer has to take care of his livestock, he takes care of your basic needs. But one day, you and the other slaves get the idea that you'd all like to be free. You don't want to be his slaves. Sensing a possible slave revolt, he comes up with an idea. He will pay you. But he's also going to start charging you for your food, shelter, and clothing. And he's barely going to pay you enough to cover these expenses. Has anything really changed? He may even decide to pay you less than you need to cover these expenses. This means you're actually in debt. So now you're forced to work for him even more to pay off what you owe him. How could you ever work enough to pay off your debt if the conditions of your servitude keep you perpetually in debt? We could complicate this scenario even more if we imagine that the slave owner sometimes prints more money so that the value of the currency goes down and the cost of food and housing rises. This is the form of slavery in the modern world. It's wage slavery and debt slavery. Until the slaves actually own the plantation or the means of production, until the slaves actually own the products of their own labor, until the slaves are actually decision makers, until the former slave owner is working alongside the former slaves as an equal, instead of living off the surplus value created by their labor, slavery hasn't been abolished. Most Americans, and democratically minded people around the world, believe that everyone should have the right to vote. They may not believe their vote makes a difference, but that's a different matter. In principle, they believe in having decisions made by democratically elected representatives who are accountable to the people who put them in office. Contrast this with the way corporations are run. Did you vote for your boss? Does the company's upper-level management represent you? Is the CEO accountable to you? At work, how free are you? What are your rights as an employee? There's an obvious contradiction between the libertarian or democratic values that most people profess and the totalitarian structures they submit to for the greater portion of their lives. And of course, these massive, unaccountable corporations use their acquired wealth and power to influence and control the government. So it's a threat to liberty in a larger sense as well. But even if we were successful at getting corporate money out of politics and holding elected officials accountable to the people, it wouldn't resolve the major contradiction that I've pointed out. The vast majority of workers are under the direct authoritarian control of these same institutions for most of the day, most days of their lives. Why is there not public uproar? I don't think very many workers would vote to lay themselves off in large numbers, or to outsource their own jobs to foreign countries. And I don't think they would vote to cut their own pay in order to give top executives a raise for poor performance. Why do employees not demand to have the right to vote for their bosses, or to vote directly on company decisions that directly affect their lives? The main irony I want to point out is that in a Western society that claims to be for freedom and democracy, and against tyranny and totalitarianism, most Westerners live most of their lives in a workplace which is tyrannical and totalitarian, and which is absolutely unfree and anti-democratic. Unless you own your own business, or work as some kind of independent contractor, you probably have a boss. Your boss owns you. Your boss tells you what to do, and you do it. Your boss or bosses make decisions that directly and indirectly affect you, without giving you any say in the matter. Sometimes you may be allowed to give some input, but they're the ones who are going to make the decisions. If you give input that they don't like, they may even fire you. And then you're going to lose your ability to feed, clothe, and shelter yourself and your family. So how free are you, really? The company you work for creates a certain amount of profit, and you help to create that profit. But you have no say in how those profits are distributed. You don't have any say in what percentage of those profits should be paid to the CEO versus what your fair percentage should be based on your own individual contribution to the group. Someone may object here and say that you're free to leave the company and go work for a different company, but that doesn't address the issue. If you're forced to sell yourself into slavery, but you're free to choose which master you sell yourself to, you're still selling yourself into slavery. You have no choice but to work for someone. You can choose to apply to work for anyone who is willing to hire you, but whoever hires you, they are your boss, and you're going to be in a subservient role. And by definition, they're going to be paying you less than you're worth. If they weren't making more money off of your labor than what they're paying you, they wouldn't hire you. So you're entering into a lopsided arrangement whenever you work for someone else. So if you believe in equality, why would you choose to enter into a relationship that's unequal and hierarchical? If you don't want to live in a country that's run by a centralized, authoritarian, totalitarian leader or governing body, why would you submit to work for a company that's structured in exactly the same way? So this is the central point of socialism that seems right to me. I don't want to live in a totalitarian state, and I don't want to work for a totalitarian corporation. I think that if I'm part of a business, I should have a vote in business decisions. If I'm contributing to the success and profitability of a company, I feel I deserve some say in how those profits are distributed. I think I should have some say in hiring and firing decisions. If there are managers at all, instead of the workers themselves being the managers, then I think the workers should be able to vote on who to appoint to management roles based on merit, and vote on when it's time to remove someone from a management role. In a free market, what is stopping socialists from starting a company and structuring it according to socialist ideals, where the workers are the owners and the company is run in a democratic way by equals? In a free market, what prevents socialists from starting a company that pays all of its workers an equal share of the profits produced through their collective labor? If workers would rather work for a company like this, then according to free market logic, competition in the labor market would ensure that this company would be able to attract the most highly skilled and qualified workers. Surely such a company, made up of the most talented individuals, would be highly competitive with other companies who operated by the hierarchical and authoritarian model. So why do we not see the socialists carrying out their revolution in this way, in the free market? I'm asking. This is a serious question for all the socialists out there who may be watching this. I really want to know. I think it's because you want the government to take money away from other people who work and give it to you while you do nothing. If I'm wrong, then instead of organizing with other socialists to protest and demonstrate and try to use the government to raise taxes on other people and increase entitlement spending, go organize with other socialists to build your own factories and create your own businesses. Protest against big government. The more the government interferes in the free market, the more barriers there will be for you and other socialists to start your own worker-run factories and businesses. Don't you want workers to be able to start up their own businesses and factories so that they don't have to work for businesses and factories that are owned by the capitalist class? If so, vote to get rid of government regulations and taxes that make it harder for them to do so. Vote to get rid of all the government regulations and taxes on small businesses so that entrepreneurial socialists can start their own businesses without government interference and operate them according to their socialistic ideals. The enemy of socialism isn't the free market, it's government. Start a business that pays a living wage and offers health care or whatever else you want the government to force other business owners to do. What's stopping you? If you're a socialist and you believe in workers' rights, democracy in the workplace, income equality, and all the rest, either go out and do what I'm suggesting, or be honest enough to admit that you don't really believe in socialism. What you really want is a totalitarian government that offers you free handouts by stealing from other people by force. If that's what you want, don't be lazy. At least get a gun and go rob people yourself. But if you want true socialism, I've given you a way to achieve it. There's nothing holding you back. You can have socialism right now. Nothing's stopping you. Get together with other people who share your values and start a business. It's that simple. Go do it, or shut up and be a wage slave for the rest of your life. Michael Moore, Bill Maher, and all these other rich and famous socialists earn way more than the average working person in America, and certainly more than the average person in the world. If they really think income inequality is a serious problem, why don't they do this? Anything they earn over the national or global median income, give it away to the poor. If they really believed in what they preached, this is what they would do. No one's stopping them. If they're for income equality, they should keep for themselves no more than the median income and give everything else away. They can give it to minorities, they can give it to single mothers, they can give it to Planned Parenthood, they can give it to hungry children, they can give it to schools and hospitals, they can give it to any individual or organization they want. But they don't. They may give some away, but that's not enough. They should give away every penny they make above the median income if they believe in equality. But they don't. I'll take them seriously when they do. I think they just want to make money by exploiting popular resentment toward the privileged class so that they can join the privileged class themselves. But if you're a true socialist, make this pledge right now. Pledge that you will give away every penny you earn over the median income. This may be easy for you if you earn less than the median income and you don't think you'll ever earn more. But if you're a liberal college professor who earns more than the median income, what's your excuse? Admit that you're full of shit. You don't believe in freeing exploited workers any more than you care about individual liberties. You don't believe in self-ownership. You believe in government ownership. You believe that the state owns you and has the right to take anything from you. You want to use state coercion to take from me and everyone else and redistribute wealth and resources according to your will or the will of the collective. Understand this. The principle you're advocating and the logic you're employing is the same principle and the same logic behind human sacrifice. No, I'm not being dramatic and comparing redistributive taxation with human sacrifice. Obviously, they're not the same thing. What I'm comparing is the underlying principle and logic behind each. And I'm saying they're essentially the same. The individual has no rights and no value, and the collective has unlimited rights and unlimited value. The individual must be sacrificed for the salvation of the collective. Any violation of individual rights is justified by the authority of the state. The individual is reduced to a collectively owned slave. And no government, no authoritarian hierarchical structure will ever abolish slavery. These structures are all built on some version of slavery. This is the absurdity of state socialism or democratic socialism. A lot of people who call themselves socialists are all in favor of a more powerful central government. They imagine that the government will free the workers from the oppression of the capitalist class. But the new socialist state just takes the place of the capitalist class. It only steals the wealth of the capitalist class along with its slaves and becomes the new slave owner. Now the government owns the means of production. Now the government owns the products of the workers' labor. Now the government makes all the decisions. But still not the workers themselves. government isn't the solution. State socialism is slavery in a different disguise with a new name. And we've seen how that works out when we look at history. So I'm completely against trying to use the government to institute change. I think the government is the problem. The free market is the answer. Liberty is the answer. In a free market, unless there are government regulations preventing it, workers can start their own businesses. They can create corporations that are built on principles of equality for workers. They can create democratic or representative business structures in which all employees are also part owners of the company and have a say in company decisions, and have a say in how the company's profits should be distributed among the workers who created those profits through their collective, productive labor. If someone new is hired by the company, they become an equal partner, and everyone has a say in hiring and firing decisions. If managers are appointed, they'll be elected. They may have term limits. They may be voted out of office. That would be up to the workers who run the company. And there would be no one model that all companies would be forced to follow by the government. If you and your business partners have a different idea of how to run things, you don't have to do it my way or anyone else's. But you don't have to conform to the current authoritarian model either. Every company is free to adopt a structure that its workers feel serves them best. The best thing about what I'm advocating is that there's really nothing preventing it right now. There's no need for any revolution. There's no need to wait around for politicians to act in the interest of the working class. All that's needed is for working class people to get together, come up with a business plan, and go to work. If you're a truck driver, get together with other truck drivers and talk about starting your own trucker-owned trucking company. If you're a waiter or cook, get together with other waiters, busboys, cooks, bartenders, and whoever else you all feel that you need on your team, and open a restaurant. No matter what industry you're in, think about how you can organize with other workers and start your own company in which you all have an equal say in the decision making, and you all have a share in the profits produced through your cooperative labor. No one owns you. No one else owns the wealth created by your own hard work. You do. And I don't have a one-size-fits-all solution to sell you. You're free to create your own model in a truly libertarian society. Some people may feel that everyone is equal and deserves equal income. Some workers' corporations may adopt the value that everyone deserves a share of the company's profits in relation to their individual contribution to the company's profits. This is the value I advocate. I believe in meritocracy. Different people have different skills, and some skills may be more highly valued than others. Some people are more talented or more hardworking. Some people may work more hours or offer more specialized skills or perform more dangerous jobs. So I don't personally advocate absolute equality in terms of income. There are any number of reasons why some people might deserve to be paid more than others. Maybe there are jobs that few people want to do, so additional incentives are needed to encourage people to choose these jobs. This could be voted on by the workers who own the corporation. Of course, a lot of people are going to vote that they should get more money. But the fact that everyone gets a say in the distribution of wealth would probably prevent any extreme inequality. I don't know what the perfect system would be, and like I said, different workers' corporations might have different visions. But those different visions can be agreed upon by consensus among equals, instead of by authoritarian top-down decision. And I think that will be better for everyone, except the few at the top. Of course, in a libertarian society, nothing would prevent the formation of top-down corporate structures. But given a choice between that and a worker-run business, who would choose to work for an authoritarian company? So I think that the competition in the labor market, created by worker-owned corporations, would be enough to destroy the old top-down structures. So free market principles like competition can actually bring down the class structures of the capitalist system, without throwing out what's worth preserving in capitalism: economic freedom, competition, choice, meritocracy, and incentive. And all of this can be achieved without sacrificing liberty by creating an all-powerful state. And as the nature of corporations changes to become more equal, democratic, and people-centered, our government will also return to what the Constitution intended, because there will be no more authoritarian private corporate tyrannies to exert political influence and control. Of course, the worker-run corporations might still pool their resources together to fund candidates that they like, but this would reflect the interest of the working-class individuals who make up the corporation, as opposed to the interest of a few wealthy elites as it does now, because the corporation would be owned and run by the working class in a democratic way. So there might still be some need to address the role of corporate campaign donations, but it seems to me that it would at least be far less of an issue. Using this strategy, the people themselves can take charge of their destiny instead of petitioning the government to pass laws forcing employers to pay a living wage, or provide health care, or to adopt fair hiring practices. Let's do away with the employers altogether and do it ourselves. This isn't an abstract philosophical argument. It's a call to action. If you don't accept government tyranny, don't accept corporate tyranny either. Don't accept wage slavery. If you're libertarian, don't support anti-libertarian workplaces. If you believe in democracy, create democratically run workplaces. If you're a socialist, recognize that the free market, and not the government, offers the best hope for the realization of your ideals, and for the abolition of the capitalist class system of worker exploitation and alienation. Stop waiting for a revolution from below. Stop waiting for the politicians to fix everything for you from above. Libertarians and socialists of the world, unite. For me, the most important ideas in libertarianism are self-ownership, free association, non-aggression, non-coercion, and free enterprise. I think the best socialist arguments are the ones that point out the hypocrisy in our current political and economic systems. But if we define socialism in the way I have, which I think is actually the original and true definition, is there really any conflict between socialism and libertarianism, or between socialist goals and the free market? I don't think so. I think democratic socialists went wrong by trying to achieve socialist aims through democratic means rather than through free market solutions. I'm against tyranny. I'm against authoritarianism. I'm against the tyranny of a single dictator or group of dictators taking away the freedom of the majority, and I'm against the tyranny of the majority taking away the freedom of a single individual or minority group. I'm in support of socialism insofar as it opposes tyranny and economic exploitation of individual workers by authoritarian corporate and economic structures. I just see the best solution in the free market rather than through big government. I'm in support of libertarianism insofar as it opposes state tyranny and promotes self-ownership, non-coercion, and free markets. But just like some tyrants pretend to support socialism in order to give more power to totalitarian state institutions, other tyrants pretend to support libertarianism in order to give more power to totalitarian businesses and financial institutions. The common denominator is the totalitarian nature of each, which threatens liberty and sees the individual as nothing more than a human sacrifice to the godlike power of authoritarian collectivist institutions. If you look at cultures where actual human sacrifice has been practiced throughout history, I think you'll find that these were societies that elevated the needs and values of the group above the needs and values of the individual. It's really a logical impossibility that it could be otherwise. Let's say that there was a bad harvest this year, and there's a famine in the village. Let's say everyone believes that this means that the sun god or the rain god or whichever tribal deity is displeased. and that the only way to appease this deity is through human sacrifice. In South America and other places, tribes sacrificed large numbers of individuals for what was believed to be the good of the tribe. To me, this is the central danger of any collectivist ideology. Is the absolute antithesis to the idea of individual rights. I don't think it's limited in any way just to ritualistically sacrificing a human being to appease a tribal deity for the sake of the tribe. The same collectivist logic would justify any other form of sacrificing an individual for the sake of the tribe. Let's take the same hypothetical village from the example I just gave. Now let's say this is a community that has no superstitious beliefs about gods connected to their crop failures. But still, there's a famine in the land. There isn't enough food for everyone. But if they kill a few individuals, or maybe even eat a few people, the community as a whole can survive the winter. They'll do it for exactly the same reasons that they would sacrifice members of their group to appease a deity's wrath. So people who blame primitive beliefs and superstition for human sacrifice haven't understood anything. Sure, those primitive beliefs are a problem, but the deeper problem is in adopting the values of collectivism over the values of individual rights. But of course there is a case to be made for limiting an individual's freedom to the extent that it infringes on the freedoms of other individuals. So the question arises, is wealth murder? Or is wealth theft? Is taxation theft? Does this present us with a moral dilemma? As a thought experiment, imagine that there is a worldwide famine. Millions, maybe even billions of people are starving. Let's assume that those who have food at all only have enough to feed themselves and their children. And I mean at a bare subsistence level. Surely no one would condemn them for not giving away what little they have to others who have nothing at all. But what if, in this global famine, a small percentage of people were hoarding vast stores of food? What if it were more than they and their children could ever eat, no matter how gluttonous their appetites? Would we be unjustified in condemning them for allowing millions to starve? Wouldn't they be murderers, in a sense? And to take things to the next level, what if they had actually caused the famine? Imagine if a small percentage of people owned all of the farmland, all of the farm equipment, all of the lakes that have fish in them. What if they owned all the land and made it illegal for anyone else to hunt, fish, raise livestock, or plant gardens? They completely own all of the world's food resources. They're like ticket scalpers who buy up tickets and then sell them for inflated prices because there's nowhere else that anyone can get tickets. And what more right do they have to the earth's resources and produce than anyone else? From a certain perspective, private property is theft from the commons. To understand this perspective more clearly, let's try another thought experiment. Imagine that there is an apple tree. It's just growing there in nature. I come along and pick an apple. At the same time, or a little later, you come along and pick an apple too. Neither of us owns the apple tree. Neither of us has stolen from the other. But when you come back the next day, you find that all of the apples are gone from the tree. I've picked them all. I've put them all in baskets. You reach for one, and I shove you. Those are mine, I shout. Maybe you argue that I have no right to claim them. I might argue that I have a legitimate claim of ownership because of the labor I put into picking all of the apples. And this is actually one of the arguments people use to defend private property rights. And I basically agree that people have a right to the fruits of their labor. If you till the soil, plant seeds, water them, and so on, I don't think I have the right to come along and steal your corn. But fundamentally, what gave you the right to claim that land as your own? If you gather stones and wood to build a house for yourself, I don't think I have any right to just move in. I'll respect your right to claim ownership of that house. But fundamentally, what gave you the right to chop down those trees? Did you have any more right to the raw materials than I did? What if there's only enough wood and stone for everyone to build a small house for themselves, but some people take more than their fair share in order to build themselves a giant castle? Won't others be left homeless? What if a few hunters capture all of the buffalo, put up fences, and claim them as private property? Did they have a right to do that? In a sense, private property is based on the threat of force. I claim this lake as my property, and all the fish in it belong to me. If anyone else tries to fish here, I'll kill them with my spear. Maybe someone else kills me, and they claim it as theirs. Maybe no one else is powerful enough to take it from him, so after he dies, it becomes his son's property. His son trades it for a herd of buffalo. The man who traded him the herd of buffalo for it eventually sells the lake to someone else for a bag of gold. The person who paid a bag of gold for it will say that the lake belongs to him because he bought it fair and square. But what right did the other person have to sell it? When you trace it all back to the beginning, it's all ultimately based on the threat of force. It's all based on theft. Someone simply claimed an exclusive right to own what belongs equally to all by nature. And I think we need to understand this. And I'm not trying to say that we should abolish all private property rights. But where do private property rights come from? If they come through the threat of force, as I've suggested, then how could anyone complain about having their property taken from them by force? Their own claims of ownership, ultimately, rest on the threat of force. This is where I see a certain hypocrisy in some libertarian arguments. Let me see if I can point out the hypocrisy to you. Imagine that a group of people land on an island somewhere. Maybe there are natives living on the island already, but they kill them all or force them all off the island. Now, in an absolute sense, maybe this isn't necessarily wrong. Maybe those natives had claimed ownership of the land by killing competing tribes, and maybe they had only maintained ownership of the island by using force to repel invaders who had as much right to be there as they did. If nothing else, they had at least stolen the island from the animals who lived there before they did. They just showed up, no other people were living there, they claimed it as theirs. It's not a question of good guys and bad guys. It's only a question of power. Had the natives been powerful enough to drive the newcomers away, they would have. They wanted the island for themselves. By claiming it as theirs, they effectively stole it from everyone else. The bottom line is, two different groups make a claim on the island. It doesn't matter who was there first. In an absolute sense, neither has any more claim of exclusive ownership than the other, and each has only the threat of force to back up their claim. Whoever has superior force is the owner of the island, until someone else comes along and takes it from them by even more superior force, or agrees to purchase it for a price dictated by supply and demand. But even if someone purchases the island, their right of ownership rests on the right of ownership of the person who sold it to them. And that person's right of ownership rests on force and theft from the commons. And now the island, let's say, is divided into plots of land, and each of those plots is sold for a price, so that now every inhabitant of the island claims to own their piece of land because they paid a fair market price for it. And they've set up a government which has a monopoly on the use of force, and which uses the threat of force to enforce their claims of ownership. If another group of people come to take the island by force, the government will use its military to defend the property rights of the current inhabitants. And the government has laws and courts and a police force to enforce property rights within the borders of the island, and to settle ownership disputes between inhabitants. But this is only a disguise. Underneath the illusion, the same game is being played. Those who steal from the commons and claim private ownership create governments to protect their stolen property from being stolen by others. In effect, they use the government to steal from others, but if others attempt to use the government to steal from them, such as through taxation, all of a sudden they're against government coercion. This is the hypocrisy of many libertarians. And I agree with them that taxation is theft, but private property is also theft in a sense. If you think it's fine to steal, but not to be stolen from, then you're a hypocrite. Now, socialists are hypocrites too, in a sense. In their minds, they're just stealing back stolen goods from thieves. If private wealth has been gained by stealing from the poor and working class, then they feel justified in stealing the wealth of the rich in order to give back to the poor. To be honest, I used to be a big supporter of progressive taxation as a means of wealth redistribution. But I've come to agree in principle with the libertarian view that taxation is theft. And I'm very hesitant to support the right of the government to take from people by force. If I ask you for your money, and you're not willing to give it to me, and I threaten you and take it from you against your will, I would go to jail. But the government can do the exact same thing, and we don't call it armed robbery. This is also hypocritical. If it's wrong for me and you, it's wrong for the government too. So I look at the issue of wealth redistribution in a different way. When we talk about redistributing wealth, it seems to me that we're saying that there's a problem with the way the wealth is being distributed in the first place. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to redistribute it. So I think that's what we need to focus on. If we have a system in place that is fundamentally unjust and that creates massive inequality in terms of opportunities for self-sufficiency and access to basic resources that we all have an equal right to by nature, then I think we need to actually change that system. Not simply attempts to correct for the inequality it produces through more government theft and coercion. In America right now, we have massive spy programs that violate our Fourth Amendment rights. When we pay taxes, we're paying for those programs. We're paying for expensive wars overseas that many of us do not support. Some of us are concerned about the rise of the militarized police state, but we're forced to fund it. We're being coerced into paying for our own coercion. And if you're a liberal Democrat or socialist, I just want to ask you, if the government raises taxes on the rich like you want them to, do you really think the poor are going to see a dime of that money? Sure, maybe just enough to buy their votes, but mostly it's all going toward continuing to pay for foreign wars of aggression that are carried out on behalf of banks and corporate interests and that make us less safe at home. It's going to go to subsidizing big businesses, especially the ones who are big campaign donors. It's going to go toward funding the growing surveillance police state. But it isn't going to be used for what we want it to be used for. I don't believe feeding more money into a bigger and more powerful government is going to be a solution. Socialists complain about the wealthy capitalist class. I considered myself a socialist and a liberal for several years, and I'm still in total agreement with socialists and liberals on some things. Although I'll be the first to call the left on their insanity and hypocrisy on plenty of other things. I do think we're in a class war, and the working class is losing. But to think that the government is our ally in this war is delusional. The government exists precisely to protect the capitalist class against the so-called mob. And you want to win the class struggle by creating a more powerful government? Are you completely out of your mind? So is wealth murder? To an extent, yes, I think it is. Especially when you understand that, for all the talk about free enterprise, great wealth is largely, if not completely, rooted in theft and the use of force and coercion. Seen in those terms, I think libertarians should be in basic agreement with me. If there's a famine, and I've picked all the apples, it may be fair to ask whether it's fair to take some of those apples away from me to give them to others who don't have any, and whether or not that's theft. But it's also fair to ask whether I had any right to pick all the apples in the first place, and whether that was theft too. And that's really my main point. The redistribution of wealth through progressive taxation may be justified as a corrective measure, but I think we need to look deeper. We wouldn't need to talk about redistribution if we got distribution right in the first place. If someone takes your wallet by force, maybe it's justified to use force to get it back, but we need to find a way of doing things that doesn't involve taking things by force. Is private property theft? In a general sense, I say it is. But I would also say that individuals have a right to enjoy the fruits of their own labor. If a farmer works hard, it doesn't seem right for someone else to come along and steal from his harvest. But it has to be acknowledged that he ultimately has no more right to farm that land than anyone else does. And if farmland is scarce, that's fair to talk about. In the past, when a lot of the world was basically wilderness, you could easily find a plot of land that no one else was living on. No one's built anything there. No one claims ownership of it. So you build a house there. You till the soil. You put up a fence. It's your farm now. It's your land. And in that context, it wouldn't make sense to complain since the same opportunity would exist for anyone. If you want a house, go build one. These days, we have to acknowledge that things are different. Everything is already claimed. Yet the people who claim it really have no more right to it than you do. So is taxation theft? In principle, yes, I believe it is. But when we talk about stealing from the rich, it's fair to ask whether they have any right to all of that wealth in the first place. What makes it their money? Are we talking about the money lenders who loan imaginary money that doesn't even exist to people who have to pay them back at interest? The bankers didn't do any work. They're con men. They stole money from the people who actually did the work. And are we talking about the capitalist bosses who live off the surplus value created by the workers without actually producing anything themselves? What about these banking families and royal bloodlines? Are we talking about unearned generational wealth? Who are these people that have such an exclusive claim to the land and resources? And why is any of it theirs? Let me offer you another thought experiment. Let's say you invite a bunch of guys over to watch a game or something. You order pizza for everyone. And you order enough for everyone. The guests start to arrive. You tell them to just help themselves. There's plenty for everyone. You tell them you're stepping out for a minute to go pick up some beer. But when you come back, you're shocked at what you find. Some guy had grabbed a whole box of pizza for himself. A couple of other guys had taken 6 or 7 slices each. In seeing this, the others objected that the pizza was supposed to be for everyone. But these guys had already claimed that pizza as theirs, and didn't want anyone taking their pizza. They said no one had told them that they couldn't take as much as they wanted, and that anyone else could have grabbed it if they had wanted it. But they got there first. Possession is 9/10 and all that. So everyone agreed that from now on, everyone should only take 1 slice each to make sure everyone got one. There was a lot of groaning, but everyone agreed even though it didn't seem fair. Then, 6 guys showed up a few minutes after everyone else. By then there were only 3 slices left, so they each agreed to half a slice each. Then 3 more guys showed up, but there wasn't any pizza left. So the guys who each got half a slice each told the guy who had taken the whole box that he should give these guys some of his. He refused and said that it wasn't fair for them to take his pizza and give it to someone else. He asked them why they didn't just share their pizza with the new arrivals. Of course, they only had half a slice each. But of course the greedy guy said that if they didn't want to share theirs, he didn't see why he should have to share his either. And seeing all this, you can barely control your rage. You remind everyone that none of them paid for the pizza, you did. And none of them actually had a right to any of it at all. You had ordered enough for everyone to have 3 slices, and you had expected them to be able to share it amongst themselves and not be greedy. So how would you deal with this situation? This isn't a perfect analogy, but I think you can see some parallels. I believe that the right direction to move in is away from collectivist, authoritarian solutions and toward individualist, libertarian solutions. And within a libertarian society, I advocate voluntary forms of cooperative organization based on freedom of association at the local level. Whether someone describes this as libertarian socialism, social capitalism, or something else makes little difference to me. I'm more concerned with principles than labels. But if you ask me to give a label to my political and economic philosophy, though, I will. Liberty.